Hello everybody and welcome to Fire Engineering Training Minutes. My name is Jim Walsh.
And I'm Eric Wheaton.
And today we're going to talk about one of the most underutilized, underappreciated pieces of equipment on your fire apparatus, the 2.5 gallon water can.
So the 2.5 gallon water can, the first thing we'll talk about is the operating pressure. So if you notice here, both gauges are reading 100, but the true way to tell if your can is properly filled is the weight of it. So during your daily checks, take it out of the compartment and lift them and see if there's a great weight difference. Once you get comfortable and confident with your water can, you'll be able to tell the difference. But if you really want to know, you can have a nice scale with you. And we'll check the weight on these. We'll pick this one up here. And it's reading about 15 pounds. We'll come check this one. And we're reading about 29 pounds, okay? So basically, manufacturers all vary, but the average is about 29 pounds. So we know this can is actually properly filled with the right amount of water. This one's probably about half full. So if we were to just check during our daily checks and notice that the gauge was in the green, we wouldn't really be able to tell unless we pick the can up. So we need to do that. The other thing we're going to get into is the reach and the time of your water. So your reach will be 50 feet at that first blast of water, and then it'll last about 50 seconds.
So obviously the can is going to work a lot longer. Most people don't realize the can will shoot for 50 feet, and most people don't realize that the can will actually operate for 50 seconds. What it really comes down to, like we were talking about with the weight, that's the other number that we're concerned about, is that 29 pounds. The only way to tell if the can is full is to actually pick it up. The reason why this could happen is, let's say the other shift just had a little rubbish fire and they just used a quick hit or two of the water can and all they did was fill it back up with air. The gauge would still make it look like it's full. So the only way to thoroughly check your water can would be to actually pick it up and actually sense the weight with your hands.
All right, we're going to take a look inside this can and see some of the working parts of it. So when we take the head off here, well, first thing we'll notice is this pickup tube. And that does exactly what the name says, and it takes the water, picks it up, and puts it in a nozzle to apply to the fire. The next piece is a fill tube, and this is what gauges the amount of water we're going to use when we go fill these cans. Some things you'll notice here with the fill tube and the pickup tube is that they're broken and kind of rotted. This is things that we really need to take care of and maintenance and give it a good daily check, maybe a weekly, and make sure they're in good working order so they don't end up like this.
Okay, so what we have here, we're just going to show you some basic maintenance problems we could have with the can and then all the internal parts. So obviously the first thing that happens is the fill tube goes back into the can. Like we have here, we've got the pickup tube, and then there's actually what's called the pickup tube adapter. So sometimes this might just come a little bit undone, and if you notice, sometimes it gets a little gummed up as well. Especially if you use foam in your water cans, you really need to take your can apart periodically to properly maintain it. Okay? Then what you actually have here is the actual valve. This is the valve that separates the water and air from the actual nozzle. So that'll go in here, and then you've got the actual spring. So you need to check this O-ring here. You also need to check the spring. Like, let's say, for instance, you have a can and the handle just seems a little weak. You might have an issue with the spring, or this might not be tight enough. Okay, finally, on the actual head of the water can, on the trigger assembly, there is an O-ring here. And this is the most common maintenance issue where you have a leaky can that's not holding pressure. If it's just discharging pressure, it's right here that it's actually leaking by. So you can get some replacement O-rings to make that better. Okay, then the can just simply goes together like this. And again, the reason why you want to know how all the inside parts go together is because periodically you should take all that apart, make sure there's no etching, make sure there's no debris on anything, and just make sure it's in good, proper order. And then finally, again, the collar nut, it just simply goes back on and tightens down. So that's all the different pieces on how the can actually goes together and some maintenance issues. Next, we're going to talk about properly filling the water can.
All right, so now we're going to take this half-full can and properly fill it. But the first thing we have to do is be able to drain the air out properly. So one might want to just squirt the water out, like so. But you know what? We need the water in there. We're just trying to top it off. So what we need to do is get the air bubble out. So how the can's oriented now is our air is at the top, air floats, the water's at the bottom. Remember that pickup tube that went all the way down to the bottom of the can? We need to rotate this can upside down, bringing that air bubble up to the end of the pickup tube. Now we'll bleed our air off Once we bleed all the air off, we're gonna go down and open the head of this can up to fill. So I'll go ahead and just put a knee on, use the leverage of the handle here to crack that seal, and we're gonna open this thing up. And we're ready to fill.
So if we take the opportunity and move over to this can here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and fill this can. We're just going to take the whole assembly out. And remember, the key is this pickup tube. The pickup tube makes sure that we only put 2.5 gallons of water in the can and maintains this much airspace. Okay? If we actually fill the can all the way to the top, that's more than 2.5 gallons of water, and it's not going to be enough air. So you're not going to get your 50 feet of reach, and you're not going to get your 50 foot of reach, and you're not going to get your duration, 50 seconds. Okay? So first, we're going to fill the can with water. Okay, and once water starts splashing out like that, we're done filling. You actually saw some water splash out. That lets us know that the water level is right there. Now we can go ahead and take the whole assembly, put it back together, and we just hand tighten this. It's very important that we just hand tighten. You'll see on this particular can, there's actually a hex nut on here, but the manufacturer only suggests about 100 pounds of pressure on this collar nut. Some of the other cans now actually have just threaded or knurled connections, so it's not, it doesn't require a tool at all. But just make sure we hand tighten this. Get that nice and hand tight. Now we're going to take our air chuck. And if you notice, there's a Schrader valve, which is just a typical, just like the valve on your tires on your car. You have a Schrader valve here, okay? And we just have off the compressor. Now the trick is, because we want 100 psi of air inside of this water can, we want to make sure that our compressor is at least at about 125 psi. That'll make sure that we get all the air in there that we need. So what we'll do is, so we can see the gauge filling, and if you actually listen, you might be able to hear the water. You hear the air starting to fill into the can. And we'll watch that gauge go right back into the green. We'll see that it's in the green, and we can actually hear the air stop moving. Now this can is properly filled. Then we can take our seal, our pin, and our tamper seal and go ahead and seal the can off. And this can's ready to go in service. Remember, the numbers we need to deal with here are 50 feet. The can will operate for 50 feet. It will operate for 50 seconds as long as you have 100 psi in and only 2.5 gallons of water. Let's take a step outside and take a look at what this 50-foot reach on this water can looks like. Okay, what we spoke about earlier was that if you fill your can properly to over 100 psi, you're going to get 50 feet of reach. So we're going to go ahead and demonstrate that now. Now we have a little bit of wind in play here, but you can see that we're getting about 50 feet of reach on our water can, and you're going to see that it's going to operate for 50 seconds. The only way we're going to get those numbers is if we properly fill it at 100 psi. Now, so far in this episode, we've been huge advocates of the water can, but you need to remember that we're not saying to replace a hose line. Absolutely take a hose line whenever possible. But if we find ourselves in situations where the hose line's not available, if you show up on a rescue or an ambulance or a truck without a pump, we have the ability to protect ourselves and our occupants. All we're trying to do with this is buy more time. You can see we've lost some reach, but we've still, in our 50 seconds, we're still hitting at least 30 feet here, and we're able to knock down that fire and cool it down, and at this point, we could get much closer to the fire. So we're still hitting at about the 30-foot mark, and now we're starting to lose our pressure there. So we operated for about 50 seconds. Originally, that initial hit was about 50 feet. It came down to about 30 feet, but that's going to do everything we need to do. It's just going to darken down the fire and buy more time, and that's all we're looking for here. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Fire Engineering Training Minutes. I'm Jim Walsh.
And I'm Eric Wheaton.
Thanks again.